Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy presented by OwnersBox. Today's video, you see the title. I need you to enunciate this so the YouTube algorithm gets it. Fantasy football draft strategy. Positional draft strategy. Quarterback draft strategy. Tight end draft strategy. Running back draft strategy. Wide receiver draft strategy. Look, all
Kicker
the words, get the
strategy.
tags in there.
No,
SEO kings. We're going to talk draft strategy by each and every position, just give you a general outline of how we attack each position in the draft, where we see rounds where there's value at these players, where we don't. You know, this is a back and forth. For some people, this might be really, you might think of these strategies as very strict, but at the end of the day, like, you need to be able to make adjustments based on the type of players you're drafting with, based on how the draft is progressing. You know, if you see 11 guys take a tight end or a quarterback, you can wait a while. Don't worry about that. Or if you're on the comeback and you see the guys in front of you have a couple running backs in the first 2 rounds, maybe you can wait for the comeback and look at wide receiver. So those are general strategies. We'll get into general strategies in another video, but we'll talk each position individually. We'll start quarterback. Do you want to kind of kick things off with your general philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, ever since I started playing fantasy football, and look, like there's so many different draft strategies that you can implement. Like, I'm going to say 70% of the time you go into a draft with a strategy, you're going to change it, I would say. Because like T-Mac said, what if someone, there's a group of people taking a bunch of quarterbacks at the beginning? Yeah. The one thing I've always kind of stood strong on is taking quarterbacks later. I think that's just where the value is for quarterbacks. Like, there's so many quarterbacks that score a lot of fantasy points. There are 14 quarterbacks last year who averaged over 17 fantasy points per game.
Right.
Like, there's probably a 0% chance you're going to see me draft Josh Allen first in the first round or second round in any of my drafts this year, to be honest. Because like I said, like that's like Mike Evans, Saquon Barkley territory right now is ADP is. So I guess end of second round, beginning of third.
Yeah.
I think those guys have way more value just because of the position. Like quarterback's never really been in fantasy football like something that people take a lot of stock in. So my philosophy has always been to look at guys a little bit later. So like right now I'm looking at guys like Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, all guys who are going around the same draft area as like Kareem Hunt, Gabe Davis, Tyler's favorite receiver this year, and Tony Pollard. Like I'll sacrifice those guys to take
one of these guys. Yeah. I'm kind of a similar, not quite the same, but very similar kind of thought processes. I'm probably not going to see Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, or Patrick Mahomes on any of my fantasy teams because I see other guys in the elite tier with them that are going a few rounds later. And like you said, in spots of the draft that almost seem like I don't know what the word is. I'm going to need to figure out this word. It's like a dead area at the position. It's not that these players aren't any good, but it's players that don't get me as excited, and that's the perfect time to address it. Quarterback and tight end, I'm very similar with strategy. I'm just not really as flexible. There are guys that I just won't even look at. I won't even consider them. But for me, the guys that I do really look to are Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson. They're kind of the centerpieces at the top tier. If I am through the draft and don't get them, I'm probably not looking at quarterback again until the end of the draft. Lamar's going just early in the 5th, Kyler Murray going at the turn between the 5th and the 6th. And again, I put it in my sheet here as a flat tier is what I called it. In my mind, those
you
are
can make up whatever
name
you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's our show.
Exactly. Yes, it is our show. Running back, and what that means is at the skill positions, running back and tight end. I'd rather go quarterback. I'm looking at the guys: Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Miles Sanders, A.J. Dillon, Damian Harris, Kenneth Walker at running back. Then we got like Hollywood Brown, Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson, Michael Thomas, and Brandon Cooks at wide receiver. I like Sanders and Dillon this year. There'll be people I will target, so there are going to be times when I don't take one of these guys. But in that spot, I really like taking Kyler and Lamar just because they're high upside guys in that elite tier that aren't being drafted as such. So that's general philosophy at the top.
Yeah, and even like you kind of mentioned it. If the court, don't force anything. I'm always about the best player available. You're fine if you're taking Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields. And you know what? Just filtering through spot starters some weeks when maybe it's a bad matchup for either of those guys. That's totally fine. Like we said, these quarterbacks score a lot of points. There's get your star elite players in the receiver and running back first.
Yep.
And then Worry about quarterback later.
I will
an
admit
afterthought.
that when the first year I started playing fantasy football, I just went by, okay, I filled out my wide receiver, running back, and then now I'm just going to take next round, I'm taking a tight end, next round I'm taking a quarterback. If you're new, like that isn't the strategy to go with. Just there's a fall off at quarterback and tight end from the elite guys that's really significant that makes it that there needs to be a breakup at these positions. But you mentioned it. Like I'm happy to punt the position, look at guys in rounds 11, 12, 13. Those guys would be Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, even Daniel Jones is a guy who's going undrafted. I'm happy to be riding the wave of those guys at the end of the draft if I see fit.
I agree.
That's a general thought on tight end or on quarterback. Let's go to tight end now. Tight end is another one I'm not very flexible with. Wide receiver and running back, I'm flexible. I can kind of do anything based on the round, to be honest. It's a lot of it has to do with how the draft unfolds. But for tight end, if I'm not holding a top 6 pick, like if you don't have the first, second, third, all the way to 6th overall pick in my draft, I probably don't end up with one of the elite tight ends. I'm not typically drafting a TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts. Who else am I missing? Obviously, George Kittle's in that tier.
Dallas Goedert. End of it.
Yeah.
Dalton Schultz is, but I think I would look at him a little closer.
Yeah, I was more looking at up to Kyle Pitts, George Kittle, Darren Waller. Waller, Pitts are two guys I'm not really paying attention to very much. Kittle, I'm willing to draft if the value's really there. Yeah. But if you're in that 9 to 12 spot, I would definitely be paying attention and trying to take Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews. And don't be worried about addressing and missing out on a running back in the first 2 rounds by taking one of these two. These guys are difference makers at the position. So I'd be willing to look to those guys. What do you? Is there anyone beyond that? I know you mentioned Schultz, but
Schultz. So Schultz is my exception. Is someone I would look at just because I think he's going to have a good year, just with how this kind of Cowboys offense is looking starting the season. But I'm in a similar headspace as you for sure. If I don't get Mark Andrews, Kittle, or Kelce, I'm going to wait. I don't mind waiting for the later guys and you brought up a good point too. Like at the end of the first round, like taking Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews, like they have wide receiver 1 value ish. Like maybe not that high, but they can be. We've seen Kelce, we've seen Gronk, these tight end ones that finish right in par with like the top 5 or 7 receivers.
Yeah, Kelce can do that.
Yeah, for sure. So. 14 tight ends last year averaged over 10 fantasy points per game. So there's just not a lot of players, tight ends, that score a lot of fantasy points.
Yeah.
And it's kind of different from the quarterback's position, but you got to take a similar approach, I think, because there are guys later on who can fill that 10-point threshold. Like Zach Ertz was a perfect example last year. He went much later in drafts, undrafted a lot of the time. I would think he obviously moved in the middle of the season.
Yeah.
But if you have your wide receivers and running backs like solidified for the most part, it's like 3 receivers, 2 running backs, maybe an extra running back even at that point, and in your 8th or 9th round, you can still get guys like Zach Ertz, Cole Kmet, and even Dawson Knox, who's a guy that probably has a pretty good outlook heading into the season too. So I would say I'm starting to look at tight ends if I'm not getting those top 3 guys around 8 or 9, because you don't want to completely just not draft a tight end. I wouldn't go necessarily that route. I wouldn't say you're totally fucked if that happens.
No, I don't think so at all.
Because there's spot starters, but you can get really unlucky with tight ends too. Sometimes you'll try to put some sort of value add in, and you can end up with a goose egg. But I think that's a better option than even having. That's a better option because you can have 4 or 5 really good wide receivers maybe at that point, or 3 really good receivers and 3 good running backs. So
that's what I have in my notes. So Zach Ertz is a player I look at because I also believe he's in kind of that dead flat tier that I mentioned. Renfro, Devontae Smith, Gabe Davis, Tyler Lockett, and then at running back, Cordell Patterson, Tony Pollard, Devin Singletary. Those are guys I'm not willing to take them and then kind of punt tight end. If that makes sense to you. I mean, if I'm taking these guys and not taking Ertz and I still don't have a tight end, at this point I'm pretty close to punting the position. Those guys I'm not excited about to be willing to do that. So Ertz is a guy I believe he's like right around the 8th round, right now, is a guy I'd be willing to do that. And then Knox, to a certain degree, I'd do as well. He's in the 9th. But that's kind of my philosophy there. But the last thing I had here was, again, it's just also losing out like on some high upside sleepers on like the Freiermuths, Gesicki's, Henry, Albert O. Like if I take those guys who are going like I think they're going right now in like the 9th, 10th.
Yeah.
For the most part. Those are guys where I can miss out on like Kadarius Toney, who I love.
Yeah, exactly.
A couple other guys that I think have really high upside. And these guys are just screaming to me like tight end 10, and I get 10 points a game from them. Like I can go to Robert Tonyan, Gerald Everett, Hayden Hurst, even Evan Ingram can give me a chance to give me 10 fantasy points a game. And they're coming in like the last rounds of your draft. So that's how I see tight end. Guys, if you're enjoying the video, be sure to like, subscribe. 20,000 subscribers for this fantasy football draft strategy video.
Fantasy football draft.
Yes.
Strategy.
Enunciate. It's like anything in this YouTube world. We're just trying to get on that keyword there. We know you love draft strategy.
Yeah.
So let's go to wide receiver. You want to kind of give me your thoughts on wide receiver?
So we've seen this uptick in fantasy points per game or per year, I guess, even now with wide receivers. Just the way that the game's going. There's a much higher volume of passing plays across all offenses. The running game's kind of down by the wayside, and you see that by the volatility of running backs in the league. Like, this prime of running backs are really like 3 or 4 years now. So wide receivers, in my opinion, are the position you should be targeting number 1 in all of your drafts. I'm going a lot of the time with the RB0 draft strategy, depending on obviously what's happening and where you're picking. But like even we did a mock draft, I had the first pick. I took Justin Jefferson.
You're spoiling because that video we recorded this morning went out after. So that's a nice spoiler.
But regardless, like there's a couple like Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, and Jamar Chase can arguably carry, all 3 of those guys can carry your fantasy team if you draft a shit running back later on in this 5th or 6th round. 20 wide receivers last year in PPR leagues averaged over 15 fantasy points per game. Like, there's a lot of receivers that produce well, but you want to have those top 25 if you're in a 3 receiver league, which most people are these days, you want to have those guys in that slot. My whole thing is draft your star wide receivers early and stash your bench with Hail Mary running backs later on in your wide receiver sleeper, in my opinion, won't exceed the expectations of a running back that you're taking around the same 9th or 10th round, in my opinion.
Wait, they will or won't?
They won't. Like the running back later on will be more valuable to your team than the wide receiver sleeper. Like, let's say, I'll take someone for example.
Because like a Kadarius Toney versus like a, I don't know, I guess for Tony Pollard, it would take like
I think it's just safer, and I'm saying that like because if you take DeAndre Swift first, and then let's say you go 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds, like I think there's more upside in taking those star receivers early than instead of waiting for a guy like Kadarius Toney. Like, I can get him in the 9th or 10th round, right? There's like a little bit of unknown. Like, sure, he has a lot of upside. He's super talented, but he's working in a Giants offense that, you know what? Who knows if they're going to be able to produce this year? You know what I mean? So I think that's a little bit more of a riskier strategy if you're depending on receivers that are going later on in the rounds, even though that they are averaging a little bit more points than running backs nowadays.
So the one thing I want to talk to you if you're playing in a league with people you work with or some friends who love football but don't know as much about fantasy or kind of casual to fantasy, like they're not watching videos like you are. They're not as engaged in the offseason being prepared. They kind of show up to the draft. They know the players. They have an idea of fantasy football because they've been playing it. But a lot of the leagues I notice if I'm playing with people who are a bit more casual, love football but don't do any studying, is running back, because everybody knows there's only 32 starting running backs on a given week or in a given week, is running back is overdrafted. You're in the first round and you have the 12th pick and you just saw 11 running backs went off the board and you're like, oh my God, I need a running back. I can't, miss out on this. Do not worry. You can take advantage of some casual leagues with incredible wide receiver duos. I'm talking, let's say you've got the 11th pick and you could go Diggs Adams. You could start your draft with Stephon Diggs and Devontae Adams, 2 guys who demand ridiculous target share, are guys who in a PPR league, just by showing up, they're going to give you 10 fantasy points because they're going to have 7 receptions and 30 yards. Another one I'm thinking of, if you're like at the 5th, 6th overall pick, you could go Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb to start. Fantastic volume again. You could go top 5 pick, you could go Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans. Don't be afraid. you can take advantage of league mates by crushing wide receiver in the first 2 rounds. Not to say I don't love the running backs in those first 2 rounds. I love DeAndre Swift, Dawson Eckler. If you have a top 3 pick, you should be going, I'll say this now, you should be going Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry. But still a really good opportunity for you. And at wide receiver, I'm someone that likes to blend upside with high floor. So let's say you're an absolute freak show and you want to take Gabe Davis. You're an idiot. But if you want to do it, you do it. But pair him with a Darnell Mooney who can give you a great floor at the position with plenty of targets, plenty of receptions. He's not going to explode. He's not going to be a top 15 wide receiver, but he's going to give you a nice floor week to week. That's how I approach wide receiver. This is a very fluid position. You need to be willing to adjust. There's not one strategy for this position. This is a position that's way too valuable, that running back, that you can just kind of pick a strategy before the draft and execute it. It's not going to happen. So
yeah. Yeah, I agree with your points. I'm obviously a little bit higher on wide receivers this year than you are, considering I took Justin Jefferson 1 of 1. I would do that in a real draft. I really would. And maybe I'm missing out on the value on Jonathan Taylor and the top 3 guys there. But I'd rather have my 3 wide receivers, If I have Justin Jefferson, Mike Evans, and Mike Williams as my 3 wide receivers, you're set. And I don't think you could do that unless you jeopardize your running back position a little bit. But I'm saying jeopardize because there's still guys like Devin Singletary who can be really good later on in the rounds. He's going around the same time as Gabe Davis, Cordarrelle Patterson maybe. The other guys like Rashad Penny, you can even take a chance on. Obviously there's a little bit of unknown within that backfield, but there's so many guys later on that will be able to pose just as much value to your fantasy team than I think any wide receiver will. Because I think wide receivers are a little hit or miss, right? It's running backs are going to get the ball. Wide receivers sometimes they just don't get thrown to some weeks. So other than the first couple. First 3 rounds.
Let's go to running back again. Another position that's really fluid. I'm kind of moving towards, I know we always have talked about this running back dead zone. I think identifying the running back dead zone this year is difficult. I see a lot of guys.
I think it depends on the person.
Yeah. How you feel about these players. But to me, I don't see a dead zone unless we're talking about the Rashad Penny's, Kenneth Walker's, Cordarrelle Patterson, Tony Pollard. That's a late tier. That's like the going from RB2 pushing RB3 tier. But there's a lot of guys that are in that 5th, 6th round that typically I'd be scared of that I do like this year. The Travis Etienne's, Miles Sanders, AJ Dillon. So honestly, it's a point for me that tells you that, hey, if you go, if you end up with Stephon Diggs, Travis Kelce, and I don't know who you'd have in the 3rd round at wide receiver off the top of my head. Maybe you T. Higgins, let's say. It's not a terrifying thing. I think you can make that happen and address running back at rounds 4, 5, and 6. It definitely is possible. And again, it's another point too, in those leagues where people stress running backs so heavily that you can take advantage of people. And there's a chance that in those 4, 5, 6 rounds, those guys are looking at wide receiver while you're scooping up running backs that they're not paying attention to. We saw it with Leonard Fournette and James Conner last year. I think there's an opportunity with the guys I mentioned. So running back is a position that I'm less worried about pairing. I'm less focused on pairing high floor with high upside, because I think that doesn't, high upside to me, or high floor, there's a ton of guys that I think are asserted as starters, and upside, I think, is a lot of the upside comes in the guys that are starters. It's like let's say a Chase Edmonds who has a lot of pass catching opportunity, but can he start to score as a running back? There's upside. But like a Tony Pollard or a Alexander Madison later in the draft, their upside is completely fueled by injury. So I think the middle rounds this year are actually not a bad time to target running backs, believe it or not.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. That's kind of where I'm looking at, the low end RB1s as my RB1s for the most part if I'm going to be drafting receivers early. But I think it also depends, the people that you're drafting with. Like T-Mac said, if you're drafting with a bunch of people who are taking all running backs in the first round, take the value in taking receivers. And if it's vice versa, do the opposite. It's all about drafting the best player available at the time. Obviously, it's easy. I think people do tend to panic a little bit when there's oh my God, there's no running backs later. Relax, breathe. There's other running backs. There's 32 teams, and at this point now in the NFL, there's not one running back for every team.
No.
So you can take a chance on a guy later on in the round, and he could turn out to be RB15 by the end of the year. And then you're laughing at all the people who are taking 3 running backs in the first 3 rounds, which is an outrageous strategy in my
Yeah.
opinion. If you're doing that, watch the whole video again and reevaluate.
I'm definitely still willing to take running backs early. It's not something I'm
Yeah.
completely against by any means. But it is something I think for us in insighting into your brains and our best fantasy football draft strategy to consider, at least consider. So we've got some more written content. I did have a best 2022 fantasy football draft strategy article that I will link down below in the description if you guys want to check it out, and all of our other written content. Let's talk draft strategy. Let's run some mock drafts. If you want to do that with us, the Discord link as well is down below in the description. If you guys like the video, let us know. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Comment down below what you guys think about the strategy. If you're doing some mock drafts right now, you want to show us some of your results, happy to check those out in the comments. We're always replying to you guys in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.